We have two ladies joining us for our next conversation. Patricia Andago is a researcher and data journalist at Odipo Dev, and Mwende Mukwanyaga is a culture analyst and editor at the same institution, Odipo Dev. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Welcome to the hot seats of the Situation Room. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Karibuni sana. Siti?
Yes.
See? Ladies, every week, Siti goes into one African country and then he digs up proverbs from that country. And he comes and gives us a proverb a day, okay, from that country. This week, he's in Nigeria. And Nigeria, they speak pidgin. So he's got pidginated proverbs. He'll give it to us in Siti's pidgin. And then we'll get it from pidgin. And your job will be to translate it from pidgin to English, and then you give us your interpretation.
Oh, wow.
Okay?
Okay.
Let's go, Siti.
Right. I have to ask to be forgiven the speakers of this particular language. I'm about to desecrate this particular language, but let me continue anyway. Jollof rice, way day for bottom of pot today, go day for top of cooler tomorrow.
Wait, what?
Jollof rice. Way day for bottom of pot today.
Yeah.
There you go.
For top of cooler tomorrow.
Okay, let's tell them what jollof rice is first of all, before I say it. Jollof rice, obviously, is rice. It's a kind of rice that we make, right? It's delicious. You've had it, right? You know what I'm talking about.
It's Pilau Jerry.
No.
Pilau Jerry Pro Max.
Let's not start the rice wars.
I know, right? Jollof rice, where day for bottom of pot. Huh? What did you say?
There you go.
Jollof rice, way day for bottom of pot today, go day for top of cooler tomorrow.
Okay, jollof rice, where day for bottom of pot today, go day for top of cooler tomorrow.
Yes.
In English, Patricia?
Wow, let me
It's actually what you think. No, it's what you think. It's actually
it's like the rice is at the bottom of the pot today, but will be on the top of the cooler tomorrow, right?
See?
So that in English,
just what
I'm trying to think of what the deeper meaning could be.
Let me give you some context. Also, for jollof rice, usually they say if you don't burn the bottom of jollof rice, you've not cooked it properly. But that jollof rice, the burnt part, it's at the bottom, but it's delicious. Go.
Don't overthink it.
Yeah?
No, just say what comes to mind.
I think it's just like something that is really valuable or really like delicious today could be very different tomorrow. Could be in a very different position tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay.
This reminds me of a TikTok sound, which is life is like rice. Don't judge people. So that the rice at the bottom will come to the top, right? And so that sound just says, when I don't judge people, life is like rice.
Amazing. Wow.
Life is like rice.
Life is like rice.
It's white.
And it's small little pebble-like pieces.
And it burns and sticks on the bottom.
Yes.
That's life.
Yeah. That's life. Let's first start by understanding your organization, Odipo Dev. What is that?
We are an advisory, culture, and media agency headquartered in Nairobi, working across Africa. Yeah, so we do a lot of work to do with research and data journalism.
Okay.
Yes.
What is Odipo?
Or
Are these initials? Who's Odipo?
That question always comes up. So the founders of the company, Odanga and Sama, had a friend who they went to school with, who really inspired them to live, extraordinary lives. He always said, don't live an average kind of life. His name was Odipo. He passed away, and so they named the company after him.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're a culture. What and what?
Media.
We're a
Media,
research, culture,
advisory.
and media agency.
Okay.
All in one.
Okay.
Yes.
So what does that mean? For example, you're a culture analyst.
Yeah.
What's a culture analyst, Mwende?
So being a culture analyst is basically studying the everyday of people and explaining the whys behind the why. So you make sense of our little world, and we'll tell you the reasons why we're showing up the way we are, the reasons why we're seeing some trends pick up, others drop, and even our responses to even very small things, like we can think about like flavor. The reason why you will go for a dawa that has more citrus than ginger here in Kenya, and perhaps in TZ or Uganda you'll find that you're going for, or when you go there you'll find that they're picking something that's more ginger than citrus. Very culturally, those contexts are basically what we're in the business of explaining and making sense of.
Does it keep changing?
Oh, a lot. Culture is very dynamic. I think even for us, when you look at our culture as Kenyans, we can say that this has shifted over the years, and there are things, there's how we structure them. There's the movements, the everyday milestones, and there's also the big shifts which happen once in a while. So ideological shifts, for example, do happen once in a while. We saw that in the previous election, where people are more permissive of a person who's endorsing the herbal things. That's a very big shift in terms of an ideology when you think of the Kenyan conservative culture we exist in. But there are other things which, as we're saying, like our music culture, that shifts a lot, but it's also, some of the things don't stick on the wall. So yes, there's some changes quickly and others changes really slowly. But there is change.
The example you've given is an interesting one. So if I were to ask,
yes,
do you think that the endorsement of this presidential candidate was based on his vegetarian leaning? Or was it a symbol of, or did he symbolize a sort of change or a move from the norm that people...
Or cultural shift.
Exactly. Or was it a protest? People are saying they have had enough of everything else that
vanilla.
Yes, exactly.
So that's interesting, because that's tapping into this trend we're seeing, sidestepping institutions. And even with the hustler conversation, it was a very big thing of we are sidestepping the day-to-day, the people who've been here are the so-called rich people. And now we are taking power back away from the normal institutions the way we've known them. So even for this, there's a cultural aspect, which I found very interesting, because for a country that has such high moral, like we put ourselves on a very high moral pedestal as people. We do. We really do.
Do we
judge.
Or do we talk about it?
We put ourselves and we talk about it.
Yeah.
However, there's a disconnect here, because it's more or less, we will not attain those set standards of like the moral things we've put for ourselves. But that becomes a problem. We start punishing people who do not attain that set standard.
Is it the high standards we set for ourselves, or is it a display of the duplicitous nature that we have, where we appear and speak as though the standards are high, and yet we entertain the complete opposite of what we speak of?
I think that's you've hit the nail on the head. I think it's about image versus behavior. I want to appear to be morally upright.
Yes.
I want to speak what I know it will be morally accepted in society, in public spaces. But, take me to my home or take me to a private space and I'm doing, the complete opposite. It's a typical Kenyan thing.
No, it's not just Kenyan.
Is it a human thing?
I think it's a human thing.
It is a human thing.
It's a human thing. Yeah.
It is a human thing, you're right.
So, ladies, there's something that's been happening lately, and I know you've been working on this, and that's why we invited you to have this conversation.
Yeah.
We have seen in rapid succession the unfortunate killing of 2 young ladies at the short stay rentals, and this has elicited a whole conversation in the public space on what is happening. Is this femicide, or is it not? Is it just murder, or is it not? Is it accidental death, or is it not? What exactly is happening? Does it point to anything that could be bubbling under in our society, or is it not? But let's first start by definitions. What is femicide?
I'll let you take that.
Okay, so we, as part of the project we have been doing for the past 1 year, we have taken the UN Nations Office on Drugs and Crime definition of femicide to allow us to sift through the data. So allow me to go through quickly the list.
Okay.
The femicide victim has had a previous record of physical, sexual, or psychological violence or harassment perpetrated by the author of the killing. The homicide victim was the femicide victim was a victim of forms of illegal exploitation, for instance, trafficking, or forced labor or slavery. The femicide victim was in a situation where they were illegally abducted or deprived of their agency. That the victim was working in the sex industry, and I think this is very important. The sexual violence committed against the victim was committed before or after the killing, and we've seen this a lot with the children, cases involving children and young women. That the killing was accompanied by mutilation of the victim, who identifies as female. That the body of the victim was disposed of in a public space. So we're expanding this, that not only for the act, but also post the act. And that the killing of the person was constituted on a gender-based hate crime.
Okay.
So it's interesting to see the definition initially was the last statement that she made, that basically it was a gender-based hate crime.
Yeah.
But femicide over the years has continued to increase and continued to evolve. So it's not just about the woman, it's the relationship that she has with, the suspect who harmed her. It's, what profession she is in, what kind of work she does. So something that started off as just a gender-based thing has moved into, what do people think women are meant to do? And how do they react when they don't act how they expect them to?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, for anybody who's been killed, it's a homicide, right? This is what we are saying.
Yes.
Any human being has been killed, it's a homicide.
Yes.
And of course, by that definition, you cannot name it until a death has occurred.
Yes.
Right? Now, even further, we cannot say or graduate a homicide to a femicide until reason or rationale has been applied. Is that what we are saying?
Exactly.
Right.
No.
Because, and now this is the question, what factors then come into play for us to deem that a killing, a death has occurred, and this is a femicide? Because remember, we said all death, somebody has killed a human being, it is a homicide. Whether you're male, female, child, old, whatever, it's homicide. But we're saying that there are certain characteristics that will then move this death or this killing from homicide to a femicide. What is that?
So I'll first get into the context of these killings, that we're existing in a patriarchal society, that we're also existing in a very misogynistic space, where the collective way that the society behaves towards women's safety, the lives, and just the dehumanization of women. That's already a context we have set, such that even when a murder of a woman occurs within that specific context, which is already the culture we exist in, there is an underlying or things that have the ingredients which have gone into allowing this act, that have also gone into excusing or making excuses for this kind of act, and that has also gone into this devaluation of a human being, such that we can down conversations to, we have to have the rationale, because it's a very thin line. I do find that it's a very thin line between having to give rationale before we rule this as a femicide.
But you know why it's important? Because there's so many counter arguments. And so you have to base it on something. That if a woman has been killed today,
it's not automatically
it is not automatically femicide.
Yeah.
But what we are saying is that in some instances, something will make it femicide. Now we want to know, what is that will then, for us to look at it and say, without a doubt, this is femicide.
I actually do not. This thing of looking at a murder and deciding when it is a femicide versus when it's not a femicide. So let's even just take the recent murders which have occurred.
Yes.
Right? And I want it to be just in the context of you've been killed, one, because you are a woman who offended, like, you upset a certain structure of power within the space. You were someone either who was taking the power in terms of like deciding that
you're taking agency.
Your agency, right? You're upsetting some structures around how the patriarchal structure is organized, where you are under the authority of people who can think for you.
Okay.
So when you put it into this context and this container, it's that these female killings are not happening in a vacuum.
Okay.
And the context, if the context has already a precedence of misogyny, that's deep hatred for women. And you can see about even the victim blaming, right? That when these cases happen, it's always now back to, okay, they're like, oh, the men are the problem, okay, but the solution lies with you, the victim, right? So we keep like turning this around and pointing fingers back to a victim. So there is a very big culture that we have curated around this dehumanization of women that at this point in our culture as Kenyans, I do not, at least so far, I don't think I have seen a murder where the femicide conversation, like the things we have been highlighting, where we can be like, this is shaky ground. Like it's clear.
If you look at, you know, bottom line, if you look at all the cases that are there, it's sort of like at the end of the day, I'm killing you because you are a woman.
Okay.
That's how it becomes a femicide.
But you see, you use something to arrive there.
Exactly.
And I think I want to go back into, Mwende, you already gave us what the UN Office on Drug and Crime has defined as femicide.
Yes.
That means it has set a threshold and said, this is not ordinary homicide.
Yes.
This then goes into femicide. So you have to look at it. Was there a previous record of altercation between victim and the perpetrator?
Exactly.
Was there illegal exploitation of the victim? Was there illegal abduction or loss of agency for victim? Was the victim in the sex industry? Was there mutilation? Was there dumping or disposing of the body parts in public? Was all these things are then saying they don't have to be all of them, but if some of them check the box, then you're getting closer and closer to labeling it as femicide. And it does not say that these ones have, there's nowhere in this UN definition that has said it has been committed by a man.
Because if a woman kills another woman, which we have known to happen in
many
history,
times,
in an intimate fashion, such as stabbing or butchering, is it still then femicide?
It is femicide. Because we also extend this conversation towards the queer spaces, right? And if that is happening, it also means that within those parameters, that women can and also be perpetrators within that space.
But it's interesting to see, at least when we look at the data that we have, that, you know, a good 90% of the cases, it's where, in fact, I would say more than 90% of the cases, it's men who have killed these women.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Patricia, what have you been working on and what have you seen?
So for the last couple of months, about 1 year actually, we've been collecting data on femicides in Kenya. So our data dates back all the way to 2016 to date. And basically what we're going to do is put together a living database on, you know, the femicide situation in Kenya to bring this to light, which is what we're launching on Friday, right? So actually you mentioned the two cases that everybody is talking about on social media, but from what we've seen so far from January 1st, the beginning of this year, there've already been 9 reported cases by the media. Yes.
9 cases
reported
of what?
Femicides.
In the last 17 days?
In the last 17 days.
Excluding today?
Excluding today.
Oh, you said January, and I thought.
And these are
No, in January.
These are reported cases as well
by media.
By media.
Okay.
Okay. Apart from the 2, what others stand out?
Right. So let me just look at the list. So we have, let me see it.
Chiti, this is...
In 2019, it was worse. Between the time of January to May, 1st of January to 2nd May, there were 46 femicides. In the period of 2019, 46.
And now you're saying that this year, so far in the last 17 days, there have been how many cases again? You're
There's
saying
been 9 cases.
9 cases in 17 days.
Yes, among the 2019 cases was that young medical student who was hacked to death.
Ivy.
Yes. So, this isn't something that has just reared its head.
Yes.
It's just not received the attention it should have received.
Okay.
Kenya National Bureau of Statistics also have the statistics, and they say women between the age of 15 and 19 will report that 40% of the women within that age bracket have experienced violence at least once, and it's gender-based violence. So the trend that speaks to violence against women is clear. It's there. It's not something you need to go looking for. It's not deeply hidden. It's there. It's just it has not been given prominence.
Yeah. I hope we'll find the list as the show goes on. We don't have it, but
it's all right. So this is just this year. But then you're also saying that you've conducted your research spanning a couple of years as well. It matches with what City is saying?
Exactly. So even if you look at the age group, majority of the women who are killed are between the age of 15 and 29. Yeah. The second largest age group is between the age of 30 and 44. So it does match. When we look at the history and the trends in domestic violence, you also see that that's where, femicide ends up occurring within those cases. Yeah.
Who are the people who are alleged or confirmed to have committed these acts of these women? Let's take the 9 for this year.
Yeah.
I mean, because quite a lot of them, but the perpetrators, who are they?
Husbands and boyfriends.
In all cases?
It's a very clear trend. It's very clear. Majority of the cases, it's a husband. If it's not a husband, it's a boyfriend. It's people who they were in relationships with. It's people who these women highly trusted. And majority of those cases end up happening at home.
Okay. Yeah. And what is the character of these killings? By that, how have these women been killed?
If you mean like how the killing itself was done,
yes,
and not the history behind it, it's majority of them were stabbed.
Okay.
Yeah, so stabbed or slashed like okay. Some of them are so gruesome that I would prefer not to talk about it. Sure. But majority of the cases, they were actually stabbed.
Okay.
Yes.
So when we look at the psychology of strangling.
He's strangling, yes.
So when we look at the psychology of killing, those 3, stabbing, or cutting, or strangling, are acts that you have to get close to somebody to do.
Exactly.
So they would say that somebody who's been intimate with a victim and wants to do something like this is more likely to use that method. And then that is how you can link between how this person was killed and who did this.
Exactly.
So then, I don't know if it's possible to establish the reasons behind, because somebody would say, well, I did it because. The case of Ivy, where the person who killed her was sentenced to 30 years just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, it was the other week.
Yes. He said he was remorseful, and the reasons why he did 1, 2, 3 was, there was jealousy and there was thought of another lover, etc. But what are the reasons that we see or hear as to why somebody then would go to that step to take life in that manner?
I think the biggest one for us has been the devaluation of the human life, women. I'm just in the sense of, when you don't see someone as a human being, it's these crimes become easier to commit, or at least they're permissible within our context, or they'll be excused. So it has been a lot of conversation around, I think this has been an ongoing conversation, women asking for their agency, women, we're building more conversations around women being their own people and being approached as human beings. And it's that idea of I own someone, or someone is a tool, and I'm very irritated that this tool did not come as we had agreed, or I sent this person money, because I find it very ridiculous that a man is not going to kill his homie because of that. Perhaps they sent them a 200 and they didn't show up for their gaming, right? Or they went and bought alcohol for them. And this is not excuses we're hearing when people are having these conversations at large, that I killed this man because he drank my alcohol, right? Which I paid for, and there was no money in return. So it's also that thing for the expectations, how we expect that women will show up in these social situations. And then when they don't, there is punishment for how you have showed up or resisted showing up. So there has been that devaluation of women, and you're seeing this a lot even on the online spaces, where people are not speaking about women like people. People are not even meeting women like people.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Mwende, do you think our society has moved relations between men and women relations, not friendship, the one that goes beyond the friendship, beyond just the platonic friendship? Has it become transactional?
Become, or has always been?
All right. Has it always been transactional?
I think it has.
To an extent where then you commoditize one another.
It has always been very transactional.
And in that transaction, who has agency over another?
I think it's when
just the buyer or the seller?
Who has more power? In terms of power structures, the man, just by the structures we exist in, has more power. But when it comes to even things like labor, we were having a conversation where we're you will all contribute to, for example, the labor of that space, but the woman is the most likely to be unpaid for it, right? Let's say with the house chores, it's very unlikely that you will be paid for doing house chores in your own home. So there is that thing for imbalances where there is the transactional. But is the man being paid for whatever he's contributing to the home? I mean, there is that social.
He's rewarded
socially for doing that contribution by the society.
In what way?
So, for instance, let me give you an example with parenting. How it's oh wow, your husband was left with the children. Oh wow, give them mini cookies and praises. If you tell me that Patricia was at home with, for example, her child, I'm oh, okay, another day at home, right?
Okay.
There is that idea, and that
is there an oh wow, your husband doesn't work?
No.
So how do you guys survive?
Because now that's again back to the structures
that conversation
which we have
happen.
Built, right?
Are you saying that conversation does not happen? I'm getting back into the question that I was asking, that in these transactional relationships, because I was building on from what you said, the value that is placed on the woman would then lead into the death. But then where does it start? Does it start from the point where there's a transaction somewhere that's happening, and then you start you'll start looking at one another not as people, but as these commodities that you've actually transformed yourselves into?
But even before the transaction, there was a structure that was put in place, and that structure happened to be very patriarchal and pinpointed where power is meant to lie. So when that transaction occurs and that power is misplaced, or the response to power is not as expected, then the person reacts, and in many cases that person is a man.
The definitions we are providing here are not in and of themselves conclusive or definitive. They are a part of an explanation that is often given by people who subscribe to a certain school of thought when they're talking about the power dynamics in relationships, and it's predominantly a Western perspective. If you look at a traditional African setting and the power dynamics, that if you interpret it for what it was, the power dynamics did not fit into this equation that we keep speaking of. Women did have power. Women did have a position. Yet the Western interpretation of it is that they were powerless. They were never powerless. Never. So, if we bring this discussion to present day Kenya, for instance, we are in the media. We have been blamed a great deal for sensationalizing and promoting the languages and the things that help bring about these situations.
Correct.
We have been blamed for promoting the victim blaming culture, where something goes wrong and the victim is the one who gets the bulk of the blame. When I say we the media, it is we the media, whether it is social media, whether it's mainline media, legacy media, whatever it is.
Research media.
Whatever, research media, not to be excluded. But the point is this. Is this really a discussion where blame should take center stage, or is this the opportunity we now have for an honest discussion? Because blame, yes, it's there, but it's predominantly in social media.
Yeah.
And it's not just the men who blame the victims.
Right.
Even women chime in and blame the victims.
Very true.
So what are these societal norms that people have imbibed that makes them look at a situation where something bizarre and something outlandish has happened, and instead of understanding it, you jump on blame immediately? Why?
The psychology of victim blaming. I think that's an article we've been going through. It was published on The Elephant. So where they have a conversation about the reasons why we jump into victim blaming as our first order of business when this comes. And part of the reasons is that femicide is more or less like that mirror, right? We are mirroring society in very uncomfortable ways by even naming this thing the way it is. It calls for a lot of like introspection, even from us. And of course, introspection is not an easy task for anyone, and especially a society. So there is that aspect of, instead of looking inwards, I think I can channel this kind of rage to telling people how to stay safe, to telling the victims how to take better care of themselves. I think there has been that conversation we are low-key acknowledging that there is a problem, but we don't want to get into the heart of it.
We don't want to, or we are unable to, because if you look at this entire discussion, it revolves around a topic that everybody has an opinion on, but the only reason why untoward activities and thinking were averted in society was because of the cohesiveness and the communality of communities. We've lost it. So the accountability that comes with societal norms is gone. You can't hold someone accountable because the me culture and how I am central to the universe comes into conversation. So you really can't hold someone accountable for what they do. People don't start with killing. People start with what you said. You dehumanize. Okay? You profile. Why is it that in many communities in this country it's considered it is okay to beat women? Why? Why? Because it's accepted. In the so-called traditional African setting, you were not allowed. That's what people imagine. Your own family would hold you accountable and you would be punished. You just, these things that people do and somehow it's excusable, it's understood. You were held accountable. We no longer hold people accountable. We find excuses and we look for more reasons to justify the nonsensical things that people do.
That's very true. I think this whole thing of, individualism, I think, like you said, is really playing a huge role. And you can see it in how the conversation plays out. Everyone is justifying based on what their personal beliefs are and their personal experiences. So the men will be like, she went for the money, so good for her, she deserved that. Some women will be like, these are the women stealing our husbands, so good for her, she deserved that. And then a woman who possibly has different beliefs will be like, no, this is a woman, this is a life, we have to think about what the real repercussions of this are. So everybody is reacting based on their own personal beliefs. There's no communal reaction or moral standing when it comes to these issues that have taken place.
And why is that? Because you see, at the very end of this, there's a death. Okay? So yes, you've dehumanized the person. You've treated them to be whatever they are, an item, an object, a commodity, whatever. But going to the extent of so much violence that leads to death, that is a very extreme reaction. But we see it all the time. What is it that then is leading it to that extreme end?
I think I want to talk about the men for a minute because
Take 2 minutes.
many times when people talk about this, it's like the women, they talk about it from that space. But I really think there's a male crisis in this country. Men are under extreme pressure, What has happened is that things have shifted in society, roles have shifted, women have moved into positions that men used to be in, but the expectations of men have remained and even grown. So they're dealing with a very difficult situation. They have all this pressure, they have all these expectations from them. And then on the other side, they have people in the manospheres telling them a man must be like this and like that. So they react out of frustration. I really think men in this country are frustrated and they don't have anywhere to take it. Yeah, they don't know how to react to that frustration or how to deal with it. So it ends up coming out in a very extreme way.
We're paying a steep price for this individualism because the thing about community and communalism, it was understood that the role of even bringing up a child was not the role of the parents. When we talk about, we talk about it, but we don't actually understand the significance of it. If you lived through it, you would know that as a child, it wasn't your parents who you needed to fear. It was your neighbor and your relatives and whoever saw you, whoever knew your parents. They could punish you. And if they reported you, you are dead. Okay? Meaning, responsibility was understood.
Yeah.
So accountability was set at a very, very high pedestal. You knew. But the moment that is lowered, anybody who has a malfunctioning psyche will get away scot-free because the accountability factor is removed.
And our structures also, like when you think about the legal frameworks, the justice space, I think we were looking at an average of more than 2,000 days between cases being picked up and judged. That's over 2,000 days and counting. And others are still running since like 2007 and going.
In our database, only 15% of the cases were closed.
Right. And I think with the recent with Wahoo, I was watching the clips as they were going live and realizing that even the basics, the cops were accessing the crime scenes, no gloves, right? The way our space is handled, it's even with, I think when you take it even back to GBV, and the conversations where we're like, we mishandle GBV, and we're saying femicide is a culmination of this GBV at its highest form, right? So there is a way that we are very complacent even in structure. The laws are there, but we are very complacent as the legal systems are very complacent. The justice system is very complacent in terms of giving people justice. And I think this also gives people a lot of like confidence to like move through with some of these things. It's that you'll get caught and you will not be charged. After some time you'll be scot-free. Or it will be the burden of the victim and their families and the people in support to prove your guilt, right? And I think the other thing, even with the media, looking at conversations, even for us, when we say media has failed, we have failed the country just in terms of, I think one of the people asked the other day for Ivy, it's interesting that the day media covered was the day of her death, like big coverage, and then the next day was the day when the guy is being charged. In between, there's an entire conversation here where there's like a total blackout, but that's also filled in with other femicide stories, which are sensational, right? So there's also that thing for, we're in the business of giving news, and we're not in the business of also keeping people accountable as the watchdogs. So there is also a lapse in how we as the media are going about this. And again, we agenda set and we set the framing. So I think for me, it's been a conversation for, I don't understand how we ended at just BNBs and like the victim being the problem. I don't know why we are highlighting that this person's profession, being a sex worker, is like top of the news. And like, these conversations about the perpetrators are very few and apart. I think one of the most interesting ones has also been seeing the way, for us, the media houses, we've been rushing to also, and I get that thing for trying to humanize the perpetrators, where we're like, oh, this person was a nice Sunday school teacher. They were a nice, but it's also like taking away from, we are leading we are agenda setting the conversation in ways that the general public is not able to huddle in and have the conversations that we need to be having.
Which are those conversations?
So like these conversations for when we're saying about like the
coverage
the power
after the murder of Wahoo, all right?
Yeah.
How would you have wanted the coverage and the conversations?
More conversations around the power, more conversations around even this femicide. I think people doing a deeper exploration of, because I think there's also that big gap where we are using terms to describe phenomena that happen within our context, but they feel so removed. They feel very Western. They feel like they're far away from us, right? But that's also because there's that gap where we are giving people this big word femicide, but we're not doing the intense work of walking you through the ingredients of this femicide, how the balls we are dropping as a collective society. I think when these conversations we're having here about like the moving from community to more individualistic senses, there are conversations that we also need to be tethering back within this space in a way that we're not looking at femicide only on one angle of the women are angry that they're being killed, right? We need to expand this conversation to there are certain things as a society, as media, and as everyone that are allowing and, the things that are allowing this thing to keep brewing more and more within our space.
I actually want to understand more of the trigger. I actually want to hear more from the suspects themselves. Nobody goes back to them to ask them what was on your mind in that moment
or leading to, because what are we saying here? Exactly. That this is a process. Somebody just didn't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to kill somebody. Right? Yeah. There are things that happened pre-event, pre-incident. So what's happening? What triggered you? Yeah. Is it possible that something made you so angry to take that? It's not justified, but it's reasoned.
Exactly.
It's rationaled. And I think it is extremely important to hear what some of these things are, because it lends to the conversation and it makes us understand this wholly.
It's true. But we've got to remember that at that point, it's after sentencing.
Exactly.
After conviction and sentencing, where somebody has already been declared and then they've gone in and they've internalized. For example, you've seen cases where the cases where people are found in prison and they are interviewed and they say, this is what happened. These are the circumstances that led to me being in this prison where I am. And I agree. Those conversations need to continue happening.
I mean, there is media that has tried to cover it. I think African Censored has done a good job with The Last Door. They just premiered their second season. Like just breaking down from the history of the story of this person and the relationship they had with these people and what could have gone wrong that led to this act. So there are attempts that are being made that, we're moving in the right direction. I hope we have more of that.
Thank you, ladies, for joining us. Patricia Andago is a researcher and data journalist, and Mwende Mukwanyaga is a culture analyst and editor at Odipo Dev. Keep it here for more conversations.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.